Welcome fam to another video, and in this one we're going to be covering what are good rolls, how can you spot good weapons, and we're going to be doing this by breaking it down in 3 different tiers, being good, situational, and also let's say just plain old bad. Now before we get into the subject, let's go ahead and clarify this real quick. Everything is subject to change. Whether it's balance changes, maybe a new hero comes out and makes a previously bad weapon potentially even better. Now let's go ahead and also talk about the fact that they are adding rerolls sometime in the future, so just because a weapon doesn't have good rolls now doesn't mean you shouldn't keep it, because potentially in the future you can go ahead and reroll it and make it a god tier weapon. Now let's go ahead and jump into the bad list, the bad tier of perk rolls first, and let's go ahead and kick it off with probably the worst one, which is heavy attack efficiency. Now heavy attack efficiency is for what's your heavy attacks. It basically cuts down the cost of doing heavy attacks. Now there's a long list of issues with heavy attacks, so we're not going to go ahead and get into that one in this discussion. But let's just go ahead and say heavy attacks right now are just not very good. But if we look at the list of perks now, this weapon, the rolls are not bad at all. It's really almost exactly what you want from a weapon. It has crit chance, crit damage. So right there you have your good crit right there. And beyond that too, it has plus 20% straight up damage and also an element with affliction. So all around, the weapon itself is actually very good. Now we're gonna go ahead and get into these other perks later on. And there's a different issue with this weapon, the issue being the fact that the Storm Chaser's Revenge just simply is not very good. You probably want a Storm Blade or another quick weapon over this one. Issue being that for the attack speed that's lower than these other weapons, it's just not putting out as much damage. Actually, you know what? I may need to go ahead and take it back with this one. So let's go ahead and jump into the next role that goes into the bad list, and that would be longer durability. Now, long durability is pretty obvious. It basically makes your weapon more durable, but when it comes to perks, I can't really think of one that's more useless than this one. Now, while your weapon lasting longer is, yes, a good thing, it's definitely not something that you want to get in your limited 5 or 4 perk rolls. Let's go ahead and jump to number 3 on the bad weapon perks, and that has to go to weapon stability, which if you don't know what that is, weapon stability is basically reducing weapon recoil. So instead of getting any of those nice rolls like, you know, extra damage, magazine size, fire rate, you know, just, I don't know, just a couple examples, we get things like, you know, ability to shoot, or I guess aim with less recoil. Now the issue being is that's just not very useful, that's all. Now for this we get a 2-for-1. We get number 4 and 5. Number 4 being damage to stunned and staggered and knocked down targets. Number 5 being impact and knockback. Now let's go ahead and actually talk about this for a little bit. Now this is a case where a weapon seemingly would actually work pretty well together. You know, it gives you extra impact, and with that knockback too, you can go ahead and get yourself a good amount of extra damage for stun, staggered, and, you know, of course, knock down targets. Now, the biggest issue being is I've only ever seen the plus 25% impact take place of generally where you want your elemental damage. So this game is very reliant on elemental damage, and the fact that instead of getting that, you get the, you know, impact is kind of just really destroying the chances with the weapon. Alright, and number 6 is going to damage to slowed and snared targets. Now the issue with this is the amount of times you can go ahead and slow or snare enemy is just way too specific and just way too difficult to pull off. So if you don't know, there's a couple ways you can go ahead and slow or snare a target. One being just simply using wooden floor spikes, but they also have to be, of course, slowed and on the wooden floor spikes to actually get the extra damage. Now beyond that, there's also some abilities or some characters you can go and slow, but once again, that's just way too specific to be worth leveling up. Now moving on to situational perks, this is to me when things get very interesting because these are like perks that borderline good, but also sometimes very situational. Now let's go ahead and look into something right here. Now it has damage to afflicted targets, that dreadful long durability. But looking past that, we also have plus 10% weapon damage that causes affliction. Now let's go ahead and get into the damage to afflicted targets. Now I know you're asking, Frenzy, okay, so what's the difference between this conditional damage and something like damage to slow and sear targets, or something like damage to stun, staggered, and knockdown targets? Now, see, the big difference is this also correlates to something you would really want too, which is weapon elemental damage along with affliction. And beyond that too, like even without elemental, the plus 10 weapon damage that causes affliction is also pretty decent. Not great, not as great as elemental, but still pretty decent. So the big difference is there's also a couple of ways to cause afflictions beyond having it on the weapon, but when you do get those two together, it's very good, very powerful. Okay, and real quick, to talk about something that's very close to damage to afflicted targets would be crit damage to afflicted targets too. So the reason why I like this a little bit less is because while it can result in some god tier rolls, it's also very specific. So it requires you to go ahead and get not only affliction damage, but also crit chance too. So even though, once again, this can be very, very good, it's also even more very specific as far as getting the rolls you need to make it useful. Now, number 9 is fire rate. Now, fire rate can be a great thing and it can be a bad thing at the same time. Now, the issue with fire rate is it also allows you to consume more ammo, release ammo more quickly. So if you do pick up fire rate, it's gonna give you, of course, more DPS, but also it's gonna make you consume more ammo. And we all know ammo can be an issue when it comes to Fortnite, especially depending on the weapon you're using. Now, another issue is some guns just don't benefit from extra fire rate. Now, my bald eagle, it does benefit slightly, but it doesn't really benefit much because the base fire rate is already very slow. So if this thing was an assault rifle, or let's say an equalizer, which is basically the SCAR, it would definitely benefit when it comes to fire rate. Bald eagle, not so much. It's going to fire slow regardless of how much fire rate I have on it. Now, up next on something that is situationally good would be magazine size. Now, I know this may come to a shock to some people, but magazine size can actually be very good. It really, once again, depends on the weapon. Similar to fire rate with the bald eagle, if you have a weapon with a magazine size of, let's say, 5, 25% extra magazine size isn't going to do much for you. But if you have something, you know, like a Thrasher or a submachine gun, or just something with a large magazine, an extra 25% can be very significant. Like, for example, let's say you had a Terminator, an extra 25% in the magazine size would be absolutely amazing. So it can work very well on giving you sustained DPS, or like, you know, DPS uptime. So it's very important. Make sure you go ahead and consider like what weapon you have before you just completely discard magazine size. Now, I know this one is gonna upset people just a little bit, but I also have to go ahead and throw crit chance and crit damage under situational. Now, if you can go ahead and have that situation work out in the rolls for you, it's absolutely one of the best rolls you can go ahead and get. But the biggest issue with crit chance and crit rolls is you have to have crit chance before you can have crit damage. Without crit chance, crit damage is absolutely useless. Now, crit chance does, you know, it benefits you regardless of, you know, not having crit damage, but of course, you don't want too much crit chance. Now, hear me out on this one, right? So you can't have crit damage without crit chance. What's the point of having, let's say, 200-300% crit damage if you don't have any crit chance, or you have like 5% crit chance? So you also don't want too much crit chance without crit damage, because then the crit chance just kind of becomes a waste. I would say optimally you want maybe just one good crit chance roll. Potentially 2 would be okay, especially if you, once again, you know, get some crit damage rolls. But I can never really see the point where you'd want crit chance, 3 crit chance rolls, and then crit damage. Now let's go ahead and move on to the good tier. What are rolls you generally always want? Now I'm gonna go ahead and place this on the low tier because you really don't want too much of it. Even though I would say one good roll is perfectly fine, I'm going with reload speed. Now you may think, okay, so how does reload speed help my DPS? And once again, that goes to damage uptime and also sustained DPS. And now I'm not saying optimally you even want reload speed. What I'm saying is I can't really think of too many weapons where I don't want a little bit of extra reload speed. Now, one role I personally love would definitely have to be headshot damage. What's not to love about it? You aim well, and you should be aiming for the head under most conditions anyway. So you aim well, and you get extra damage on headshots. It's not really too conditional, and it just all around boosts your damage. And now we're getting into the territory of weapon rolls you always want, and that definitely has to go to damage. Now, what's not to like about damage? I mean, I don't really know what else to really say about it. It gives your weapon more damage. All around great perf, always welcome, always good for you. Now, the last thing to talk about is something that can generally make or break a weapon. The first thing I look for in any new weapon is, does it have an element? Now, elemental damage can literally make or break a weapon. It's very essential with how damage is calculated, and there's 4 different types of damage. Now, energy, let's go ahead and talk about that one first. Energy generally just gives you more damage against elements. Now, it's not preferred, right? You generally want to go ahead and get either nature, which is strong against water, water, which is strong against fire, or fire that's strong against nature. So it gives you a massive boost in damage, and honestly I think they need to go ahead and maybe tweak the numbers just a little bit to make it so that non-elemental weapons are more useful late game. But that is once again a completely different topic. So that's always the first thing I check is, does it have an element? And beyond that, what roles come with it? Now there's also 2 different things we need to talk about. So one being the fact that there's 2 different types of elemental damage. There is general, just elemental, which would be a rare rarity. I'm sorry, blue rarity. And going beyond that, there's also elemental with affliction. Now, elemental with affliction is just absolutely wonderful, something you always want to keep an eye out for. And even the weapon has, like, let's say 2 or 3 bad rolls, that one element can simply make it a usable weapon. Now, something that's also badass is when it comes to elemental weapons or weapons that have by default energy damage, you can also roll a element on top of that energy damage, making it even more effective. So energy weapons can be very, very nice if you get an element to roll on them. Now that just about covers everything. If I missed something, please don't be afraid to let me know down below in the comment section. Beyond that too, there are some unique roles which I didn't cover that are unique to event weapons, but I didn't feel like it was very important to cover those. Generally, unique weapons, they're generally pretty good. Now beyond that too, if you haven't done so, go ahead and like the video, it helps out a whole lot. Sub, make sure you turn notifications because I do live streams too, so if you have any questions you can go ahead and ask me live and be like, yo Frenzy, I just got this new weapon, I want to know, you know, all around, is it a good weapon? And beyond that too, we also have a Discord, should be down in the description. You can go ahead and check it out, join Discord. We have a Fortnite Save the World section, post your weapon in there and ask people like, yo, what do you think about this weapon? Once again, everything on this list, whether it's bad, situational, or good, can be very good under the right circumstances. So make sure you always give a weapon a fair chance and a fair look through. And also don't be afraid to level these things up too, because if you don't know, you get all your evolution materials back along with 90% of your experience. So don't be afraid to experiment yourself, Don't take my word as a Bible. Go ahead and see what you think and how you like things as you know your time with this game progresses. Once again, thank you for watching. Peace out. Take it easy.